Syria's return to the Arab League undoubtedly represents a triumphant moment for the Middle Eastern country's President Bashar al-Assad. It reflects an important shift in how regional actors view the reality of his political survival. Although some Arab nations continue to see Assad as an illegitimate leader, the fact that Syria has begun normalising relations with regional countries suggests that the United States and its Middle Eastern allies have given up on their Assad must go policy, at least for now. Washington, according to American officials, remains, quote, profoundly disappointed and troubled by Arab states' attempts to legitimize Bashar al-Assad, quote. But given that the US did not even attempt to punish its allies over their decision to normalize ties with Damascus, it is entirely possible that they might have got a tacit approval from the State Department to make such a move. But how will Syria's remission into the Pan-Arab institution affect the ongoing civil war in the West Asian nation? I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ report. In this video we will discuss Syria's remission into the Arab League. Did Assad really win? Since at least 2019, Arab states had begun dealing with the situation in the war-torn country pragmatically, reaching out to Syria by reopening their embassies in Damascus. A recently established Iran-Saudi truce has made it easier for Syria's rehabilitation within the Arab League, and many Arab states have begun to reassess their opposition to Assad's rule. Almost 12 years ago, Syria was suspended from the Arab League, a 22-member organisation founded in 1945 to promote regional cooperation and resolve disputes, though in reality has long struggled to help solve conflicts. Damascus was also sanctioned by the West over the Assad government's brutal crackdown on protesters at a time when the so-called Arab Spring was sweeping across the region. The escalation of the protests led to a brutal fratricidal war, resulting in the deaths of at least 500,000 people and the displacement of millions of others. Although the conflict in the Middle Eastern country is no longer among the top news in the global media, the Syrian civil war is far from over. With Russian and Iranian help, the Syrian Arab army managed to recapture significant portions of Syria that were under the ISIS and the Turkey-backed rebels' control. However, to this day the United States controls Syria's oil field in the southeast of the country, while Turkey, be it directly or through its proxies, still holds parts of northwestern Syria. The United States has illegally established a military base near Syria's border with Jordan, and the American troops are also stationed in northeast Syria. Damascus, for its part, frequently accuses them of illegal exploitation of Syrian oil. From the Syrian government point of view, the end of the US military presence in the Middle Eastern nation is possibly one of its major geopolitical goals, although it is unlikely to be achieved in the near future. Thus, saying that Assad has won the war would not be true. Before the conflict erupted in 2011, he had an effective control over the whole country. Now his Syrian Arab army controls around 70% of the Western Asian nation, and Assad has become heavily dependent on his allies, Russia and Iran. His re-legitimization in the Arab world is unlikely to weaken Iranian influence in Syria. As a pragmatic leader, Assad is expected to attempt to re-establish economic ties with most influential Arab states, namely the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Although politically, Syria will remain in Iran's and Russia's geopolitical orbit for the foreseeable future. The United Nations warns that 90% of its Syrians are below the poverty line. The country desperately needs aid and investments. The Arab League cannot deliver any of that. There are, however, Gulf Arab states that can, which is why Damascus will seek to normalize ties with them. Syria's government needs financial support and legitimacy, but money from Arab countries is unlikely to immediately start flowing into the war-torn nation. The economic impact of Syria's return to the Arab League is expected to be very limited because of the Caesar Act, a wide-ranging series of sanctions enacted by the US government from 2019 onwards. Sanctions apply not just to Syria, but also to any third party that deals with Damascus. Therefore, the Gulf countries are unlikely to risk jeopardizing their relations with Washington over potential economic ties with Syria. That is why the process of normalisation of relations between Arab nations and Assad may take ages. More importantly, there is no guarantee that the war in Syria will not in the meantime once again enter the hot phase. The Syria's remission into the Arab League, as well as Arab nations' recognition of Assad as a legitimate Syrian leader, represent Damascus' significant diplomatic victory, although many challenges still lie ahead of the Middle Eastern nation. Russia, Iran and Turkey. Following the Chinese brokered normalisation of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the Middle East seems to be entering a new political era. Russia reportedly attempts to follow Beijing's diplomatic approach and help Syria and Turkey bury the hatchet. But that could be easier said than done. Turkey, unlike Arab countries, occupied parts of northwestern Syria, and its potential withdrawal from the neighbouring country would mean that Ankara has openly betrayed its proxies in Syria's Idlib province. Russia, Syria's main ally, has been encouraging Damascus's reconciliation with Ankara for years, but even if Moscow manages to eventually have the same diplomatic success that China recently had and help Syria and Turkey normalise relations, there is no guarantee that the conflict in Syria will come to an end in the near future. Presently, the Middle Eastern nation is facing a low-scale positional warfare in the north, but the problem is that the United States is unlikely to leave Syria anytime soon. As a result, pro-Iranian militias will almost certainly continue fighting the American forces on the ground, which will have an impact on various attempts to bring stability to the war-torn Arab country. Moreover, Israel will undoubtedly continue conducting airstrikes against the Syrian Arab army and the Iranian-backed militias, which means that a lasting peace in the Western Asian nation is still not on the horizon. However, if Russia, Iran and Turkey find a way to bring peace at least to Syria's restive northern regions, that will be a significant step in the years-long process of stabilisation of the Middle Eastern country. The very fact that Ankara changed its approach regarding Assad and started holding talks with Syrian officials indicates that Syria could finally enter a less turbulent period. More importantly, from Russia's and Iran's perspective, Syria's remission to the Arab League represents their victory over the American attempts to isolate President Assad, which is why Moscow and Tehran are expected to continue helping Damascus get more legitimacy in the international arena. Syria's return to the Arab League should not be viewed as a precedent. Sudan was ostracised in the 1990s for its alleged support of Islamist terror organisations, and Egypt was suspended from the Arab League from a decade from 1979 because it signed a peace treaty with Israel. But the Arab League's latest move signals to opposition Syrians, especially those living in the government-controlled territory, that they are left on their own and that they have zero chance to overthrow Assad. On the other hand, Turkey-backed opposition groups as well as the US-sponsored Kurdish forces still control most of northern and eastern Syria, and that is unlikely to change anytime soon. Instead, for the foreseeable future, Syria will remain in a state that can be described as neither war nor peace. Finally, Damascus's remission into the Arab League is unlikely to have a serious impact on the Western policy regarding Syria. The United States, the United Kingdom and the European Union have clearly stated that they are not interested in normalisation of relations with Assad, but preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. They do not seem to be in a position to attempt to once again destabilise Syria, which gives Syria's leader room to consolidate his power and attempt to improve relations with the Arab states. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ Report. Please don't forget to share your opinion on our analysis and also subscribe to our channel and visit our website kjreports.com. Thank you.